Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral, efficiently caffeinated, style points amassing weekly YouTube show all about Notre Dame football and the drama that comes with it. I'm Eric Hansen, still in my TV clothes. He's Tyler James. Come to think of it, I think you're in your TV clothes too.
That's true.
And you guys are going to fill up our question queue. More on that in a second. On tonight's show, we'll pull back and look at the bigger picture and the perception of the 12th ranked Irish as they get set for a top 25 showdown against Navy. We'll get you all caught up on the latest from Coach Marcus Freeman's Monday press conference, including a brief and encouraging injury report. We'll take a look at the much evolved Navy offense, Notre Dame's special team savvy, and we'll take your questions live and snicker at your quips. So start filling up the question queue. This is and that's a guitar lick.
I don't think you've ever done that better, Eric. That was expertly done. Maybe it being your birthday, you're extra sharp today. So happy birthday. I haven't said that verbally to you yet. I did send a message to let the world know on Twitter earlier today. But a happy birthday to Eric Hansen, the one and only Eric Hansen, as I like to refer to him, even though I don't know that he actually loves it, but it's become our running bit. So he stuck with it.
Well, you know what's funny is at my high school, there was another Eric Hansen. He spelled it differently. So I like being the one and only Eric Hansen.
All right. Well, first things first, Football Never Sleeps is now presented by MyBookie. Sunday is the one day a week I get to think about football that has nothing to do with work. Even at a surprise party yesterday for my mom's birthday, the NFL games were on so we could all keep track of our picks. That's why I like to use MyBookie. Because it's the one book that has your back. There's no fluff, no second guessing. There's just straight up action, and the decisions are in your hands as you're looking to find an edge. Maybe you have your eyes on a money line, or you really like the over on a game total. MyBookie has what you need to make a good wager. And MyBookie has hooked up our audience, our Football Never Sleeps audience, with a special deal. Sign up with the promo code INDS to double your first deposit of up to $1,000 with a 100% deposit bonus. You can take advantage of that deal by clicking the link in our video description below, and remember to use code INDS to get this incredible deal. Bet anything, anytime, from anywhere with MyBookie, the sports book that gives you control. And as always, make sure that you are subscribed to us here on our YouTube channel, which is free. That allows you to get questions in during the show, and make sure that you don't miss any of our content that rolls out throughout the week. You can also sign up for a 30-day free trial to InsideNDSports.com with promo code NDYT. That gets you access to our premium analysis, and recruiting coverage, and special access to us over on the Insider Lounge, which is where we spend a lot of our time. Our community shares all their opinions, whether we like them or not, and we drop our inside information there first. Appreciate everyone chime in, everyone giving Eric happy birthday wishes.
Thank you.
Chris W., Irish fan, Scott Fegan, Ron Robert, Eric Swope. Thanks for joining us, and we'll get into a good show. All right, first up on our opening drive, Eric, is what the polls say about Notre Dame. I know you spend more time than most on where Notre Dame should be in the polls and where other teams should be in the polls as an AP poll voter. Notre Dame didn't move at all in either the AP poll, the coaches poll, following its 31-13 win over Georgia Tech. The Irish are ranked number 12 and number 11 respectively in those polls. Why do you think Notre Dame didn't move up this week?
You don't, your movement doesn't happen in a vacuum. So you're not always rewarded for big wins. You're not always penalized for shaky wins. A lot of it has to do with what everybody around you is doing. And I didn't think Notre Dame was going to move. And I didn't move them in my vote, even though that I have them in a different spot than the poll actually does. And the reason is there weren't a lot of top 25 losses. Certainly not either close enough just above Notre Dame or just below them in the rankings to push them up or push them down. And they could have beaten Georgia Tech 90-0 -2, and I think they would have stayed at number 12 this week. There are opportunities coming up, and so for the people that don't see Notre Dame in the playoff projections, if Notre Dame keeps winning, if they go 11-1, which Tyler doesn't think they will, but if they go 11-1, they're in the 12-team playoff.
I do agree that if they do go 11-1, they will be in the playoff. But I don't necessarily agree that Notre Dame's going to finish the rest of its slate undefeated.
And this week is tough.
Yeah, and this week could be as tough of a week remaining for Notre Dame, depending on how this matchup goes. What else Navy has waiting for Notre Dame? You have ranked Notre Dame number 7 in your individual AP poll, which is higher than most, if maybe not higher than everyone else who is an AP voter. What are you seeing in the Irish that you don't think other voters across the country are seeing?
Well, I don't know that they're not necessarily seeing it. What I think is you get past maybe the first 5 teams, and then you can kind of put 6 through 22 in a pretty similar bucket. And I think that when you look at, there's some websites that show how everybody voted, including the AP, but I mean, there's some that'll have a graphic so you can visualize it without any person's name. And you can see the variance in a lot of different teams. For example, I have Indiana and Iowa State lower than some people have those undefeated teams. And I kind of felt bad about IU given the one-sidedness of their win over Nebraska, and yet you kind of have to look at the whole season too. But again, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to move people up. And then there are teams I have higher than others. Notre Dame being one, Texas A&M being one. I probably have Alabama a little bit higher than some people. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is that parity. That's why you see such a variance in those teams. The top 6 are a lot similar on people's ballots. And when you get below, let's say 21, there's a lot of variety there too. But that middle bucket, the teams that are really competing for those playoff spots, that's where we still need more information to differentiate those teams. And again, this is a week where Notre Dame has a chance to do that. Although I will say this, Tyler, I feel like Navy's brand doesn't bring – Notre Dame will get much more credit for beating USC, who's 3-4, than they will for an undefeated Navy team, just because of the brand.
I don't know. I think we might have hit the nexus point where it's going in the other direction with the way USC is playing now. Certainly, if Notre Dame beats Navy and Navy loses a bunch of games after that, then the luster will certainly be taken away from that. But
I don't think they will. That's the one thing that's really interesting about it, Tyler, is Army and Navy could very well meet for the conference championship, the American Athletic Conference Championship. Navy's toughest game left besides Army and Notre Dame is Tulane. Army doesn't play Tulane. They skip them in their rotation. So that could be, if Notre Dame wins both of the Service Academy games, they could be one-loss teams going into the AAC championship. And they could be playing for a playoff spot and then playing each other again a week later after Selection Sunday.
Yeah, and whatever happens late in the season would certainly be helpful for Notre Dame while those teams are playing, and Notre Dame's at home. If that's an impressive matchup between the two of them, if they were to meet in the conference championship, that would be certainly something, and maybe keep them more front of mind than maybe they have been.
I'll mention this too, Tyler. I think Notre Dame needs to focus on what it needs to do, but there is one game in college football this week that's really going to shape Notre Dame's perception. And it has to do with Notre Dame's former coach. LSU and Texas A&M are the only unbeaten teams in the SEC right now. And so whoever wins that has the inside track to getting to the SEC championship game. So how people perceive Notre Dame is in a lot of ways tied to Texas A&M. If Texas A&M wins that game, that's a feather in the cap for Notre Dame. If Brian Kelly wins, not so good news for Notre Dame, but good news for the people that still love Brian Kelly.
Yeah, and then pretty soon we'll have another committee a committee of voters to be angry about or agree with when the college football playoff.
Yeah, get off my back.
Releases its
Those
first poll.
Iowa State people are mad at me.
I know you got to be pulling for the committee to be ranking Iowa State low by the time that first poll comes out.
Well, UCF almost took care of them. It was right down to the wire in that game Saturday. I was watching the end of that.
One thing I noticed, I remember when we were recording our post-game takeaways on Saturday night that you said, I just got to find a number 25 team for my poll. And in looking at the poll today, like it seemed like there were very few others receiving votes. Like there aren't that many.
Real rare.
I was like, did they forget the others? Where are the others here?
Yeah.
It just seems to be like
I've never seen that few teams receive votes.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of interesting. That once you get to the back end of this, there's not that many teams that people feel are worthy of being in the top 25. Near the back end of your top 25, and in the AP poll are Army and Navy. Army is 23rd in the AP poll, and then Navy is 24th. You have them flip-flopped. I believe you have Navy at 21 and Army at 23. What do you like about Navy over Army at this point?
Army, when you look at the national statistical rankings, Army is better on both sides of the ball when you take the context out of who they played. I mean, you look at Army and you go, wow, that looks like a playoff team. And they very well may be. Navy's played the tougher schedule to me. The game that grabbed my attention was 56-44 over Memphis. Army does not play Memphis. They skip them in their AAC rotation. That's the bad part about these larger conferences is how many teams you skip. The schedules aren't similar. And so Army hasn't played. Army is making a more of a believer of me the deeper they get into the season. But I just think what Navy is doing offensively, even though their defense is their offense is nobody can stop it. And I know that North Texas got some points on Memphis, but in 5 of Memphis's games, they've held their opponent under 20 points, and they coughed up 56 to Navy.
All right. Yeah, I think so often, especially this year when they're both playing so well, like I think Navy and Army are clumped in together when we talk about them. I don't know that many people talk about Navy or Army like individually. Obviously, we will this week because Notre Dame plays one of them. But it's fascinating that they're both having such success at the same time. And we'll get into a little bit more of talk about Navy later on in the show.
Well, last week it was the first time they were in the same poll since the year I was born. So if you can figure out when that is, then you'll know how long an ago is. And it wasn't in the 1970s, let me tell you.
I won't give it. I won't give up the date unless someone wants to bribe me very handsomely to give up the date. That would
if you want to know how old I am, the Beatles wrote a song about that age. So
there you go. Before we get into
number 9,
before we get to some of the questions you guys have submitted, and please keep submitting questions for us. I wanted to get into what was a slow news day on the injury front from Marcus Freeman today. Notre Dame didn't report any new injuries following the Georgia Tech game. Kicker Mitch Jeter remains questionable with a hip injury, and offensive lineman Billy Schrouth is now off the injury list and officially available this week. But Marcus Freeman said his role will be determined with how he handles this week. What do you think is the best way to work Billy Schrouth back into the offense?
Right. And we should mention Jason Anye wasn't on the 2 deeps.
Yeah.
So I didn't include him. I'm assuming that he's not playing. The availability and the injury report, it's semantics. You guys don't even want to know about it. We would need beer instead of coffee on this show to talk about it. But let me get to your Schrouth question. What's the best way to handle him? I would think maybe getting him in for a few snaps as a reserve late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would give him then the bye week to get completely healthy. And then you have a chance to work him back into wherever you feel like he fits the best, which I still think is right guard. But then you can say, what do we do with Rocco Spindler? Do we put him against Sam Pendleton at left guard? Do we send him to the bench? You have some extra time to get your chemistry right with Billy Schrauth re-entering that mix, because I still feel like he's Notre Dame's best offensive lineman, although Pat Coogan has been playing very well.
Yeah, and I would like to think like that putting Schrauth back in isn't going to necessarily mess with the chemistry in any significant way. Like he obviously
the Pendleton Rocco thing could.
Yes, absolutely. And so you have to sort of, and maybe let's, for instance, maybe Billy Schrauth can play. Say Billy Schrauth can play this week, and it becomes a starter. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But let's use that as a hypothetical. Whatever you do at left guard this week doesn't have to be whatever you do at left guard after the bye. Like you can sort of make those decisions game by game and sort of continue to evaluate that. And maybe there's a rotation that Notre Dame thinks makes some sense
Bob
there
Morton
too.
suggested on our podcast a couple of weeks ago.
And so that's going to be a fascinating discussion after during and after the bye week, the next bye week for Notre Dame. So yeah, I think it would be nice to maybe work Schrauth in some fashion. Maybe even like, heck, it wouldn't even hurt maybe to put him out there for like field goal, like have him be a blocker on the field goal and PAT unit. They use some backup linemen for those units as well. So maybe there's a way to just sort of get him out there and be ready and test out that ankle. Now, sometimes there's guys jumping up and down, and then maybe someone lands on his foot that you don't want to, and then you're in a bad position. So a lot of it's going to depend on how confident they are in Billy Schrauth's ankle to sort of take on any sort of tension and whatever it will face in terms of obviously his own weight, but then like the force that is required for him to successfully block those big defensive linemen that he has to handle.
And as a reminder, the last game he played in was Purdue, the beginning of the Purdue game, which was way back on September 14th.
All right. Tom Frawley says, high ankle sprains are not conducive to playing the Navy. Pat Coogan and Pendleton had their hands full with Biggers of Georgia Tech. All right, let's get into some of these questions, which include some happy birthday wishes as well. Eric Swope says, happy Justin Fisher week to all, and a very happy birthday to the one and only Eric Hansen. Question, should we expect any surprising changes by the Navy offense, or is it the same old flex bone?
Thank you, Eric, for having a cool name. Thank you for the happy birthday wishes and for calling me one and only. Yeah, you better get ready for some surprises. If you think this is a replay of last year's 42-3 victory by Notre Dame in Dublin, think again. Navy fired their offensive coordinator after just 1 year on the job. They were 122nd in scoring. And Grant Chestnut is now, I believe, an analyst with Western Kentucky. So he was the offensive coordinator last year. And they brought in a guy named Drew Cronick. And both of these guys spell their names different than the regular nouns. Cronick doesn't have an H. Chestnut doesn't have a first T in it. But what Drew Cronick brings is a really interesting hybrid offense of kind of a modernized wing T married with some pro-style concepts. And it's fun to watch. And everything's different. Yes, there is still triple option elements to it, but no longer are they like, okay, let's just sit on the ball and have 3 possessions a game and play keep away. Navy is 84th in the country in time of possession. They commit penalties. They throw the ball. They're number 2 in passing efficiency. It's a really exciting offense with a lot of explosive plays. Their defense is on the field an average of 11 more plays than their offense. So that speaks to the explosives. There's a Tyler posted this on our message board. There's a really good tutorial from Nick Saban on the Navy offense. So again, this is going to look way different, and it's going to look different than what Army does. Army's throwing the ball well too. They don't throw it as much. They're more traditional in their triple option approach. Navy is way different. And so I think that's what makes this game so challenging, because you could concoct a triple option defense. Al Golden was really good at that. This one, you can't necessarily cheat and say, well, let's take a cornerback off the field here or move a cornerback up into the box, because they'll throw it over your head.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that breakdown that Nick Saban did with College Game Day on Navy's offense. And I even asked our subscribers on the Insider Lounge if they would be interested in me maybe doing a deep dive of some sort on what that looks like, to maybe some highlights, some plays that Navy has done, just so people have an expectation of what Navy's offense looks like now, which is a bit different than what Notre Dame fans are used to seeing, even though Notre Dame fans are as familiar with Navy's offense as just about anyone. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what other wrinkles Navy tries to implement. Even last year, I feel like Al Golden was talking about, like, they were doing all kinds of things that they didn't expect from Navy at the beginning of last year, and that wasn't as successful of an offense. But they certainly.
But it was a blind date too.
It was a season opener, and so we talk about how poor Navy's schedule has been. Maybe they've had plenty of things that they have been working on, but haven't needed to use, because they're beating teams handily with what they've been able to show already. So they probably have some other things that they can use against an opponent like Notre Dame, where they maybe feel they are outmanned in some ways, but can get more creative in what they're trying to do. All right, Joshua Williams says, is Kaiser a given for the most tackles in this game, or do you think someone else like Drake Bowen? Happy birthday, Eric.
Thanks, Joshua. I think Kaiser is a given for being on the field a lot, because he's going to be kind of the traffic cop out there for Notre Dame's defense. He's a problem solver. He's going to be able to figure things out on the fly, and he's going to be able to express what Al Golden wants. He was, I believe, the leading tackler in last year's game, and I think he'll probably be in the position to do that. But I could see there being a defensive lineman being that, just depending on how Notre Dame decides to play this. And it could be Drake Bowen. I'm telling you, Drake Bowen has impressed the heck out of me the last few weeks, and especially Saturday. He is really coming on. He had, Pro Football Focus gives out film grades, and he had over a 90, and he is now one of Notre Dame's top ranked defenders for the year, and he's just getting better. I had asked Al Golden about him during our coordinator interviews last week, and he's just seeing things better, and he's playing faster because he's confident. The thing about these games, even with Navy not playing a traditional triple option, is there are guys that can adapt to these concepts better than others, and I don't know where Drake fits into that bucket. I know Kaiser can. So even if Drake Bowen doesn't have a great game this week, I would expect, when they play Florida State, he'll be back to his bruising self that he was against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, but you mentioned like Bowen seeing things better. Like, this is the game where you have to see things like crystal clear, but also like not just see things, but also know what you need to be focused on, because they're doing a lot of things to distract you in addition to what you're actually supposed to be focused on. Kaiser, I think, makes the most sense as the leading tackler given his experience. And I just pulled up the box score from last year, because I was like, I don't know that many of the linebackers that Notre Dame will use that played or made a big impact. Like, I don't know that Jaden Osbury played much. He did not record a tackle in the game. Jalen Sneed did have 2 tackles. So maybe Jalen Sneed gets more involved this week. But yeah, you'd like to hope that Drake Bowen can handle this. Kingston Viliamuasa, how can those guys be used in different ways? And Notre Dame has in the past aligned differently than its traditional defense against the option look. Now, maybe it's harder to do that against Navy when it's running so many different formations and running some shotgun and stuff like that. But I think Notre Dame will probably have some sort of wrinkle within its defense as well that allows those guys to be put in a good position and then sort of play free, as they like to say, while also being very disciplined and keeping track of their assignments. All right. Scott Fegan says, evening, everyone. Eric and Tyler, just want to say that I'm not wearing shoes tonight and it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Will you allow that tonight? Yes, I'm Irish and a former sailor, but the Irish win out. And then he said, more serious now, can Notre Dame throw against Navy and get more confidence for Riley Leonard and the wide receivers? I have to believe all need a chance to throw downfield.
I'll answer the shoes part and the throwing part, but I'll give Tyler the first shot at the throwing part, and then I'll jump in. As far as the shoes, yeah, take your shoes off. It's just in the Notre Dame football live chat on Wednesday where you must wear shoes. I've relaxed the no drinking rule for 3 weeks in a row. I haven't regretted it yet. So either people aren't taking advantage of it or it's enhancing the quality of the questions. So I'll let Tyler answer your passing question, then I have an opinion.
Yeah, I do think there's a chance for that. I just don't I don't think you don't want to build your offense around that. I think what Notre Dame needs to do offensively is be its most efficient self. And I don't know that throwing it deep is going to be what is most efficient for Notre Dame, even if Army or Navy is susceptible. Sorry, I really struggle with that. Susceptible to the passes downfield. So I mean, I don't know that we'll see it any more than we did against Georgia Tech, for instance. I think it'll probably be a more balanced attack and not something that Notre Dame's trying to light it up down the field, but I think they'll take their chances when they can. Certainly, I imagine the Georgia Tech game plan maybe looked a little bit different before Riley Leonard threw his interception early. So making sure that he doesn't make mistakes like that will be important as well, because you don't want to give Navy extra possessions, even though they have not been as time of possession dominant this season as they typically are. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of plan of attack Notre Dame has with its offense and passing game, and if that's something that they feel is a better opportunity this week than maybe others.
My opinion is, Notre Dame doesn't want to stray away from that big picture evolution that it wants to do, and yet you have to honor some of the strengths and weaknesses of the defenses. Navy is way worse against the run than it is against the pass. Stanford and Georgia Tech were the opposite. And so, I mean, you're going against the 95th run defense in the country. I think you have to lean into that a little bit. And with Riley Leonard doing some of that running, I also, with Navy being 4th in the country in red zone defense, I think you use Riley Leonard in the red zone as well. But I don't know, other than Memphis, that Navy's seen a lot of passing teams with the kind of receivers that Notre Dame has.
Right.
So you don't want to abandon that. And I think there's some opportunities there. But, I don't think it's, again, I think Notre Dame fans so badly want to see bomb, 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 just to see that Notre Dame can do that if they need to. And again, I think as long as you get incremental improvement in the passing game each week, you'll have it when you really need it in December.
All right. We were talking about Navy's defense. So, Irish fan, you were talking about the red zone defense specifically. What do you know about Navy's defense beyond what we've already offered? Can you give us a thumbnail of what Navy does or doesn't do well defensively?
Well, I can show you my this is, I chart every week everybody's strengths and weaknesses on Notre Dame's schedule, past and future, offensively, defensively, and special teams. What Navy does the best on defense is its red zone defense. They're not bad on third down. They turn you over and they do try to pressure you. They do try to get tackles for loss. They do try to get sacks. They'll blitz some. And so they will bring pressure and take some chances, which Riley Leonard has got to make them pay with that. Their weakness is their run defense. And it's not just because they played Air Force. Air Force really didn't do a whole lot against Navy's defense.
Mm-hmm.
But Army is the one that has the really good defensive numbers. Navy, that's why I said you can't just say, well, let's just throw it down the field when you have Jeremiah Love sitting there touching the ball, getting 14 carries in a game, and that being a season high. I think if you're going to go over that in a game, this is the game to go over it with Jeremiah Love.
Yeah.
But again, some of it's based on reads. Notre Dame reads the defense too. But this is a game, and again, a lot of Navy's defense in the past was sitting on the ball, just not giving you a lot of possessions. And if it had the lead, it could do that. And if it didn't have the lead, it was in trouble. This Navy offense isn't subjected to those parameters. So again, you could have a 56-44 game. I'm not predicting that, but that's happened with Navy this year, that they could have a combined 100 points in a game is astounding considering what their offense used to look like. But I think this game will be a little bit higher scoring.
Yeah, I think Navy's defense isn't certainly isn't its strong point. I think they particularly with the run defense, that's something that Notre Dame should be able to take advantage of. I think it also, the time of possession part, like, it's because Navy's defense isn't getting off the field. It's not just because Navy's offense isn't controlling the ball, and they're not sort of doing it 3 yards in a cloud of dust as much as they have in the past. But I think that it's a combination of those things, and so this is it would be disappointing if Notre Dame doesn't have a good offensive performance against Navy, because I don't think that Navy's defense is anything special or be something that Notre Dame shouldn't be able to have a good game plan to counteract. It's just obviously a lot of times you're worried about sort of the number of possessions and making sure you're efficient because of what that offense does and how that is sort of a part of their defensive game plan.
Irish fan, this doesn't go to your question, but while we're talking about it, I don't know that we've said a whole lot about Blake Horvath yet. That's their quarterback. He is a junior. He was on the team last year when they played in Dublin. He did not play in that game. He was maybe the third or fourth option. He eventually played shortly thereafter and actually had a start, and then suffered an injury and was out for the season. So he played in 4 games, started 1, didn't play against Notre Dame. He was a 2-star prospect coming out of Hilliard, Ohio, which is just outside of Columbus, very close to the Horseshoe. But the thing about him is he processes all this information about this hybrid offense so well, and he's so good at reading it, and his stats are off the charts. He's 7th in the country in points responsible for games. So what is points responsible for? That's rushing touchdowns and passing touchdowns. So there are 6 guys that do that better than him, and I think Cam Ward's probably one of them at Miami.
All right. Joe Long says, you both were all about Jack Kaiser leading up to and including this year. Comment, ?
Okay, I'll let you go first because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say here.
Yeah.
Were we being doubted, or I'm not sure what?
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe Long, I do know this because Joe Long earlier said Kaiser sucks. So I'm pretty sure I understand what his viewpoint is. I think Jack Kaiser is a very important member of Notre Dame's defense. He's second on the team in tackles. And obviously we're talking a lot about him this week because he's had 8 tackles in each of the past 2 games against Navy. So he's going to play an important role in this game. I think certainly the evolution and the development of Drake Bowen, Jaden Ausberry, and Kingston Viliamu-Asa have made it that Jack Kaiser doesn't have to be the one and only linebacker leading everything. And he maybe doesn't have the same sort of athletic traits as some of those guys do. But he's an incredibly important member of Notre Dame's linebacker unit. And if he's not number 1, then he has to be 2 in terms of importance at that position, in my opinion. Maybe Drake Bowen's past him, but Drake Bowen is playing well of late. But he certainly he's got a lot of work to do to sort of match the resume that Jack Kaiser has put together at this point of his college career.
I would say if you're going to dock me on somebody that I was high on in the linebacker court, I would say Jalen Sneed is the guy that I had higher expectations for that's not living up to them. I think Kaiser, I mean, he's got a 75 rating from Pro Football Focus, which is better than average. I think Kaiser has brought that young group along, and a lot of his contributions are helping the players around him get better. And I think he's been productive. Has he been an All-America candidate? No, and I don't know that I advertise him as such. So guess I'm a little confused, but maybe I just haven't had my birthday cake yet.
Scott Fegan asks, how does Mike Mickens get the young DBs prepared for this game?
I think he's got the toughest job because of the element of Navy being such a good passing team, being the second best passing team in the country. Now, not second most prolific, but second best in terms of efficiency. And yeah, I mean, you have to, one, be able to disguise what Notre Dame's doing on the back end of their defense, but two, not bite on something and then have the ball thrown over your head. Because if you look at that Nick Saban tutorial, you'll see some of those plays where the DBs are biting and then the ball goes flying over their head to a wide open receiver. So they're going to really have to do a lot of film study. Fortunately, they have fall break this week and they can break the 20-hour NCAA rule and do some extra film study. But the discipline to be able to recognize what Navy is doing when these plays are disguised and look like each other, I think is really, really difficult.
Yeah, and I think at some point you have to be willing to, like, yes, you need those DBs to help in the running game as well, but you have to say, hey, make sure it's a run before, like, your first priority needs to make sure that we're not getting beat deep too, because Blake Horvath will throw it over your head if that's the case. So it's a very difficult proposition, and that's when you talk about, like, there's guys that have played in high school against option offenses, depending on where they play, especially if you play like a smaller level, a smaller school. Like, I imagine Jack Kaiser probably played against some option offenses in high school. But like a defensive back that's being recruited by Notre Dame probably hasn't played against a lot of option offenses because you gotta have the film to sort of show how you play against passing offenses. So I don't know what sort of experience Leonard Moore has against a triple option, for instance. So those guys will be put to the test. The younger guys, him and Christian Gray, and then Adon Schuler, being obviously this is his most significant role he's played in his Notre Dame career this season, will be asked to sort of handle that. Certainly having Xavier Watts back there as someone who is experienced will probably help a lot. I imagine Benjamin Morrison will be very engaged in trying to help coach up the guys, as Marcus Freeman said after the game on Saturday, that Benjamin Morrison was sending film clips from his hospital bed sometime around his surgery. So I think you have good leadership in that room beyond just Mike Mickens that will probably help play a role with preparing those guys. But it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to sort of be about it and be able to implement that on Saturday. So a tough job ahead for those guys. All right. Bob Alvey says, any update on CJ Carr's elbow injury? If I heard correctly, Marcus Freeman named Rezak one of the scout team players of the week because CJ was still out. Any info?
I don't have any info other than the fact it sounds like he is still out, and I'm going to see if there's wiggle room to kind of ask that question without wasting one of my questions at one of these press conferences, because it would be good to know, and maybe I can get the information some other way. I don't know that CJ Carr would have been the guy this week anyways, but he specifically did, Bob, you're right. He did mention CJ Carr hadn't been the scout team quarterback for a while. It does make sense that it's Tyler Buckner and Anthony Rezak because they have the kind of physical qualities and processing qualities that Blake Horvath has. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense for them to be the scout team guys this week.
Yeah, but Marcus was sort of teed up to give some love to the local guys that have option experience, and he didn't follow. He didn't follow on that, so I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, CJ Carr doesn't do a lot in pregame warmups that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, so I think Notre Dame's just being careful with him. They don't need him to do anything right now, both on Saturday or during the week. Certainly be nice to get him some reps, whether it's scout team or not. In practices during the season, but I think his long-term health is what's being monitored and given close attention to right now. I wanted to throw Joe Long's response in here because he didn't give much stuff besides saying Kaiser sucked earlier. He said, you guys weren't alone on Irish Illustrated, or you guys weren't alone. Irish Illustrated was all about Kaiser too, and probably still are. Kaiser, I will admit, played a bit better the last 2 weeks, but his tackles for loss or sacks or just for no gain, bad. I think he's just pointing out that he hasn't had a tackle for a loss or a sack, and so that's why he thinks
I don't disagree with that, because I mean, in last year's scheme, he was a guy that got some pressures, and I think that's not where you're seeing him excel this year. So I think that's a fair commentary.
Yeah, and I was trying
especially when you diss Irish Illustrated. No, I'm just kidding. We like those guys. We do like those guys, but no, Joe, I appreciate it. I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, Kaiser has been credited with 5 pressures from Pro Football Focus, and I just pulled that up because hurries in college football that are tracked I don't find very reliable, and certainly this has its
hurries is the least. The stat crew, it's like, yeah, if you can keep track of the hurries, that's an added bonus. It is not very standardized from one press box to another.
I will say he has 5 pressures. You know who else has 5 pressures? Drake Bowen. So, like, it's not like Drake Bowen is pressuring the quarterback at a much higher rate than Jack Kaiser, at least according to Pro Football Focus. Kingston Viliamu Asa leads the linebackers with 7 pressures. Jalen Steed has 6. And then Kaiser Bowen at 5, Osbury with 4. So, yeah, I think, like you mentioned, like that was something that in terms of things I've been high on about Kaiser in the past was that, especially last season, he was playing so much fewer snaps than some of the other linebackers, but he was still making those kinds of plays, whether it was pressures, tackles for loss, pass breakups. He was doing that at a higher rate than some of those other guys. And that hasn't necessarily translated this season in the role that he's being asked to play, which is much different than what he was asked to do last season.
Correct.
Okay. Scott Fegan asked, will Love and Price see more carries?
If I'm the offensive coordinator, yes, they would this week. But I also think Riley Leonard will get a good share of carries, especially in the red zone. I think he is someone that would be really difficult for Navy to handle in the red zone. And again, they've been really good with turnovers there. They've been good at stopping people in the red zone. So yes, I think it's time that those guys get a little bit more carries, but I wouldn't forget about Riley Leonard. I think people don't realize that Riley's right there in terms of average per carry, and sack yards are added into his average, and he's over 6 yards a carry. So I would not forget him either. But Love, I think we're going to see the best of Love in November. That sounds like a song that Green Day should do.
Yeah, and Love's carries did increase against Georgia Tech, though the output in the running game wasn't there. His impact was felt more as a receiver than as a runner, although he did have a touchdown run. So I think that the carries will, I believe, continue to stay high for Love, and we'll see more Price than we did last week. I know that sometimes it's sort of a hot and cold thing after the first couple of series when they go through what they have sort of mapped out. But particularly with Love, like I feel like he's become even more well-rounded as a blocker, even in the running game as a blocker when he's lead blocking for Riley Leonard on some quarterback runs. It still befuddles me that they bring in Aeneas Williams and Devin Ford so much on third downs rather than Jeremiah Love. Like, I understand them being in every once in a while, but like if Jeremiah, I'm not sure why Jeremiah Love could be so physical as a run blocker, but he's not being trusted in pass protection. Maybe it's just being assignment sound. Maybe the pass protection calls he struggles with. I don't really know. It's been a bit surprising to me that those guys, or that Notre Dame hasn't been able to find more of a third down role for him. All right. Brent Welker asks, how many current starting linemen will start in 2025?
Okay, and that doesn't include Shrouth. So we're talking about the 5 guys that started on Saturday.
I mean, you can go either way. I mean,
okay.
I think it's fair to include Shrouth because I think he's a given. But
well, I'll do the
way.
math. I won't hurt my head on this, so I will say Emil Wagner and
is that it? Is this
Emil
dramatic
Wagner,
pause?
I don't know. If Coogan wants to come back, I think it's hard not to save a spot for him. I think Jagaza starts. I think Shrouth starts. You can't not have Ashton Craig in there. So we're running out of fingers here. So I don't think Rocco's going to be starting. Pendleton's going to have to fight for a spot, but I know that they like him. And Anthony Knapp's going to have to fight for a spot. And his spot may be as an interior lineman, and he may be really good at that. And he's gaining a lot of valuable experience here. But of the guys that started Saturday, that I would guarantee 1 and maybe 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very difficult, algebraic equation. There's so many moving parts to it, and I don't know how much of it's going to play out.
And Garby could be in the mix next year. Gary Lambert.
Yeah, of course. So
Brett,
would it be inconceivable that neither of Notre Dame's current starting tackles are starting tackles next season? I mean, it sounds wild, but I guess there's a world that Charles Jagasa and Gerby Lambert are the starting tackles rather than Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner. I would have to.
It's a first world problem.
Yeah, for sure. I would have to imagine Ashton Craig is brought back as a starter with the intent of being the starter. I mean, Notre Dame essentially passed on Zeke Correll returning.
Right. But again, his timeline, I mean, not everybody recovers from an ACL in 1 year's time. And so he may be kind of dragging going into the season.
Yeah. I mean, does he have to, are we talking about who's starting the season opener or who starts the most games next season? There's a lot of good pieces there. I don't know that we have very good answers. I mean, I don't know that we had a good sense of who was going to start this season. It turned out way different than we expected. I mean, part of that.
Won't be Jack Kaiser starting on the offensive line. That's my prediction.
There you go.
Joe and I can have a beer over that one.
I do like Anthony Knapp inside better. But obviously it's crowded in there too. So I think it's going to be another interesting storyline going into next season. It was a big storyline this past offseason, but that was because we weren't sure if they had enough talent there. Whereas I think going into next season, the talent is certainly there. It's a matter of who they have the most trust in, and that's the best combination to get the
and
best
who's
guy.
Healthy.
And who's healthy too. All right. Scott Fegan asked a recruiting question. Guys, for recruiting, are we getting the 2 big linebackers, and any update on D-line or wide receiver recruits?
You want me to take that one and do it telepathically? I'm going to hand it off to Tyler.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I still have future cast predictions in for Madden Faremo and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng to eventually commit to Notre Dame. Faremo, I feel better about Faremo right now than Owusu-Boateng, but the longer Faremo waits, the more I wonder if he's sort of looking for another option besides Notre Dame. Owusu-Boateng is sort of is going to go to the end, as I, for the most part, have thought would always happen, in terms of his recruitment going to the end with various schools pushing for him. There was a time where I thought maybe he would end it for Notre Dame early, but I think Notre Dame has as good of a chance, if not better of a chance, than anyone right now. He's planning to visit Notre Dame for the Florida State game, so that will obviously be a big opportunity for the Irish. As for wide receiver recruits, Notre Dame's still waiting on word from Isaiah Mizell, who's committed to Arizona, Jalen Cooper, who's committed to SMU. Those are the wide receivers Notre Dame sort of has basically one spot for in terms of who wants to grab it, and we'll see if either of those do, or if Notre Dame has to sort of look for more options once again. And then defensive line, it's basically Jalen Wiggins is the guy to know. He's a defensive end in in rankings and ratings, but Notre Dame likes him as a tackle long term. He's committed to Florida. He's from Tallahassee, and so his recruitment's been very like hot and cold in terms of, there was a time where it seemed like he was going to make an official visit to Notre Dame. Then Notre Dame took Gordy Solfstead in his class, and then things sort of stopped with the Jalen Wiggins recruitment, and it's been picking back up lately. He's also supposed to be on campus for the Florida State game. So we'll see if that happens, and where Notre Dame stands after that. So I think that's pretty much everything at those positions right now. Running back and tight end are positions that Notre Dame's weighing in terms of guys that they may want to push for, but I think at least at tight end, it seems like they're content with settling with just James Flanagan in this class, and I do think they're going to be kicking the tires on some running back options after moving on from Daniel Anderson earlier in the class.
And remember, this year that calendar's moved up. The signing period is December 4th through the 6th, so it's right after the USC game, before the conference championship games, before the portal opens this year. And they will not be signing national letters of intent. They will be signing a different kind of binding agreement that is similar to what transfers do.
Although I don't know that there's all that's been hashed out. It's a very like they're moving in sort of weird ways with that whole process, and I guess it's sort of how a lot of NCAA changes are going with lawsuits and the like. I think that wraps it up for most of the questions we have. I do have some stuff I wanted to talk about Navy. I know we've talked a decent amount about them. One thing I don't think we've touched much on is that it is fall break, and Notre Dame has a different ability to prepare for Navy this week than it would in a normal game week. And Marcus Freeman also talked about how like Navy preparation isn't just a 1 week thing for Notre Dame. Eric, can you sort of walk us through what that looks like and what's different this week compared to the previous times that they've been working on Navy?
Sure. So, again, they've done some of their prep work back in August, and they did some during the bye week. And now that they're into this fall break period, they're not bound by the NCAA 20-hour limit rule, so they can do more. And they could actually do more physical practices. They're not going to. They want to keep that balance of not overdoing it physically, but they can do a lot more film study, have a lot more meetings, have a lot more communication without like, oh, I've got a math test today, or I have a paper to write. And so I think there's a good advantage there. The other thing is you can alter the practice times a little bit. I know that they're going to practice earlier tomorrow to maybe mimic the noon start. This is Notre Dame's first noon start of the season. They've been kind of in this 3:30 rut since after the opener against Texas A&M at night. So they can adjust their body clocks a little bit and get used to being up earlier and being ready to play football at noon rather than later afternoon when they typically practice. So I think there's some good advantages here. And again, not overdoing it and yet taking advantage of not being limited to 20 hours. And Tyler is now going to make me be a ventriloquist since he put his mute button on.
Sorry, I'm bad at that from time to time.
That's okay.
Yeah, the fall break comes at I think a good time for Notre Dame. It doesn't always work out that way, but this allows for Notre Dame to figure out everything it needs to going into this game. Like, there shouldn't be an excuse that we didn't have enough time to prepare for Navy, even though Navy has maybe done some different things this season than maybe what Notre Dame was doing in terms of prep in the preseason. But now you get to put that into practice this week and get more real live looks at it. Even though obviously Notre Dame's scout team isn't going to be as good as running Navy's offense as Navy does, but that will be what they're tasked with doing. And
when you say that too, Tyler, I thought that was an interesting comment by Marcus today, that they cannot simulate that. And so it's going to take some time in the game to get used to that speed.
Right.
And so, if they give up a field goal or whatever on the first possession or a touchdown like they get against Georgia Tech, I think you can not have to, keep yourself on the ledge. I think you can wait, and I think Notre Dame will adjust.
Yeah, speaking of that, Notre Dame has been starting slow as of late, with the offense not scoring on its first drives and the defense giving up some scores on the first drives. How critical do you think that will be against Navy this year?
I think it'll be more critical against Army because we see kind of the more traditional Army offense, Army keep away, and fewer possessions. I think this game will be a little bit more back and forth, actually a lot more back and forth. But still, you don't want to get behind to Navy and let them have the option to dictate that. Let them have the option to sit on the ball and take the air out of it and just shorten the game, which they can choose to do. That offense has gears, and that's still one of the gears.
Yeah, and I think especially if they're worried about the opposing offense that they're facing maybe more than they are some of the other teams that they played this season, that could influence like what sort of gears they choose to sort of put the offense into. But I do think starting fast feels more important. Like, yes, probably more important against Army than Navy, but it does feel more important than against Navy than like Georgia Tech, for instance, or Stanford for that matter. Like, I think that Notre Dame's defense playing well and its offense playing well, I think maybe more the offense than the defense.
They can run the fake punt in the first quarter.
Yeah, maybe they will run a fake punt early because they don't want to give the ball back to them. But I do think that matters. And on that topic, if this week's game is close, how often does Marcus Freeman go for it on fourth down? Scott Fegan asks.
I think some of it has to do with the flow of the game, Scott, in terms of, is Notre Dame's defense stopping Navy's offense? I think in general, Marcus is pretty confident in Notre Dame's ability to handle that if there's a sudden change. And I could see Marcus going for it. And especially if Mitch Jeter isn't able to go out there and kick a 50-yard field goal, I think we saw this in the Georgia Tech game, they feel comfortable with Zach Yoakum in the low 40s, but maybe not 50 yards. It was funny when I looked at his and Marcello's, Diomede's, Chris Saylor, all of them has 55 plus range on their field goals. So it was exactly the same for all three of them. You wouldn't know there was any difference, but especially the way the punting game hasn't been as precise as we thought and hoped. I guess thought for us, hoped for Marcus Freeman, and then just not having that weapon of a really accurate kicker from distance. I do think we'll see more fourth down. Go for it.
Yeah, I don't think Marcus Freeman's decisions are that influenced by how close the game is when it comes to that. Like, I think it's more about feeling confident in the offense and feeling like, I mean, some of it is analytically based, I believe, in terms of what the analytics tell you in terms of this is a better decision to go for it at this point of the field rather than punting it or kicking a long field goal. And so I think I think Marcus Freeman's strategy stays relatively the same on those short fourth down opportunities, regardless of whether it's close or more expected to be more lopsided.
And a lot of these games, Al Golden's defense, they're like, okay, we're feeling things out, and then it's like a boa constrictor, and it gets a grip on you, and then it just squeezes you.
Yep.
So until they get to the squeeze stage, and I don't know how fast that's going to come with Navy's offense, that's going to influence in my mind. So,
well, you were talking a little bit about special teams, and I wanted to hit this before we get out of here. That Notre Dame used both a fake punt and fake field goal against Georgia Tech. Do you think it was wise of Notre Dame to show those plays in a game that was in hand, or should Notre Dame have held on to them for bigger moments?
I agree with Marcus. I think his thinking was sound, and I think the ESPN crew was woefully underprepared and really overstated the whole style points thing. Tyler, I'm sure you didn't hear that, or maybe you have in rewatching the game, but that was garbage. In terms of did they show it? You can fake punt and fake field goal in different ways. Now, people are going to be trying to track and see which number 26 is running out onto the field. Is it Chris Salerno or is it Tyler Buckner? And I don't know that that's going to be real easy to decipher, but there's a lot of different ways to run a fake field goal, and there's a lot of different ways to run a fake punt. I doubt that we'll see the reverse fake punt run in the future, but no, I'd say use it again if there's a good occasion. I don't think you have to, wait for just the right. And now teams are going to have to work on that and spend time preparing for those things.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel totally about that. I sort of
disagree with me today.
Okay. Birthday agreements. I agree that like putting those things on film makes the preparation for Notre Dame more difficult. So now these teams know that, okay, Notre Dame can do this, but they also, I'm sure, know that those aren't the only things Notre Dame can do for fakes, whether it's the punt or the field goal. The Buckner one feels a little bit more like, I don't know, was that the right time for that? Like, because and how much of the execution of it is reliant upon the surprise factor that is, oh crap, that's Tyler Buckner back there. He can actually run versus Chris Salerno back there.
He can also throw.
And he could throw. One thing, like in terms of like, okay, well, maybe this buys Notre Dame something in terms of Notre Dame has had 2 field goals blocked this season. Now one was like a 60+ yarder, so I don't know. Like that was probably going to happen regardless. But maybe
that was by the same guy.
But maybe that takes some pressure off of a field goal block happening. I don't know, and maybe especially when you got Zach Yoakum in there versus Mitch Jeter, although Jeter's kicks were the ones that were blocked. Maybe that takes some pressure off of the field goal kicker. That maybe that teams have to play a little bit smarter. Yeah, I'm curious, like, how are teams going to tell the difference between Tyler Buckner and Chris Salerno? Is someone going to have to be watching Buckner as he's signaling and just keep an eye on him the whole time to see if he ever takes his like whatever color that he's wearing off for the day? Because otherwise, like, they probably look different like when you're standing next to them, but when they're running off from the sideline, like, I don't know how much different they look. And maybe someone pre-games and charges, okay, Buckner's socks look like this, Salerno's socks look like that. Notre Dame could even like ramp up like make sure that they're dressed the same, like make sure both of them have a wristband on the same arm. Like,
and I don't know that sneaking Tyler into the game is that big of a deal. I mean, when Brian Kelly was the coach, a lot of the later era Brian Kelly or middle era Brian Kelly, they were quarterbacks who were the holders. Deshaun Kaiser's first touchdown pass was off a fake field goal in the game. He eventually replaced Malik Zaire as the quarterback. Malik got hurt in that game, but that was on a fake field goal. Malik was a holder for a while. So there are teams that use their backup quarterback as the holder.
Right, but Notre Dame doesn't. And so,
yeah, they don't. But I mean, just having you can make Tyler Buchner the holder all the time, if you wanted to. If you
well,
wanted
right, but he has to be good at it to do that.
Yes, he does. He does have to be good at it.
There's more that would go into that, and obviously, I do think there's interesting wrinkles to that he's the same number as Chris Salerno, and it's hard to.
But I called that way back in August. I said, wait a second, Chris Salerno was number 32, and he changed to 26 in fall camp, and I thought something's going on here that it's the same as Tyler Buchner, and sure enough, it took 7 games for it to happen.
Yeah, I guess. It rules out that Tyler Buchner would ever be the kicker with Chris Salerno as the holder. That's the one thing we know that Tyler Buchner won't do. All right. Well, I think that's going to be it. We got to let Eric spend some time not having to worry about us for the rest of his birthday. Eric, thanks for blessing us with your presence on your birthday and working hard, because I know you had plenty to do today. Thank you to everyone tuning in. As you should know by now, it's always a good time to subscribe to InsideNDSports.com. So give us a try with a 30-day free trial with promo code NDYT. Make sure you're subscribed to us here on the YouTube channel, which is free. And I'll remind folks of our YouTube schedule for the week. We'll have our Inside ND Sports podcast uploaded on Thursday. Place your bets. Previewing the Navy game will come Friday. Eric and Bob Morton will have another Into the End Zone live show immediately after the game. And then Eric and I will share our post-game takeaways late Saturday night. And as always, check out our content over on InsideNDSports.com and have a good week.